Breathing is a huge component of singing, and if you're anything like I was when I started my singing journey, you may find yourself very confused by all the different methods and suggestions and terminology. Do I breathe through my diaphragm? Do I not breathe through my diaphragm? Do I breathe through my core? How do I get good breath support? And why am I always running out of air even though I'm taking a huge breath? Today, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of different breathing techniques, which ones are right for you and which ones might be wrong and why. And I'm going to try and make sense of some of the terminology out there and just give you some suggestions for how you can practice getting in touch with your breath and find the right breathing strategies for you. If you've been talking to other singers about breathing or doing research on breathing, Googling breathing, and you find yourself confused by all the seemingly contradictory information out there, I just want to assure you the information is not necessarily wrong. It might just not be right for you and your specific context. Before you dive into breathing exercises and try to engage your core and breathe from the diaphragm and support with the Appoggio breathing, I just want to give you some situational awareness of what breathing exercises might be relevant to you and your singing context. Breathing is one of those situations that seems like it should be simple because after all, we all breathe every day. And yet there is so much information out there and so many different schools of thought when it comes to breathing. Some voice teachers will spend 20 minutes of a 30-minute lesson on breathing exercises every week just because they stress the importance so much. Personally, I find that that's slightly overkill because once you have some good breathing methods in place and you have a good understanding of the type of breath you need and the timing of the breath and how to keep the breath flowing, you're good to go, and you just need to check in with your voice and your breath once in a while. Let me start out by giving you some situational awareness and some context to consider what might be right for you and your individual body and the style of song that you're singing. So you should know that heavier weight singers tend to do best with breath management when they feel that breath low in their body, when they feel that core engagement, when they tend to feel expansion all the way down to their hips. Even though obviously our lungs aren't in our hips, just that motion of feeling the breath lower in your body, that tends to work for heavier set singers. For lightweights like myself, we tend to feel the breath better supported if it's higher in the body. I'm not talking about shallow breathing, I'm just talking about where we feel the expansion of the breath. I do best when I feel the expansion of my ribs and I keep that expansion up here, whereas other singers may feel that expansion better in their lower body. So you're just thinking of breathing low and feeling that expansion closer to your core. That's just to give you some context of what the research shows, so something for you to consider as I talk through a few breathing tips. Something else to keep in mind is the style of song you're singing. Very robust songs with long phrases, a lot of choral works, art song, even some legitimate music theater songs. They require long lyrical lines, and you're going to need a really long, steady stream of air. So these will require deeper, expansive breaths. Whereas if you're singing pop music or short, catchy phrases in your songs that are only 3-4 seconds long, even 5 or 6 seconds long, you are not going to need that same deep, expansive breath. Here's the thing about breath. It should always be moving and it needs somewhere to go. If you're singing a 5-second phrase and you take enough breath to last you for 12, where's that air going to go? It's going to be very hard to manage. So, golden rule of thumb is take as much air as you need for the phrase, and that is going to be very dependent on the style of the song you're singing. So look at your music, look at the length of the phrases, and plan your breath accordingly. Short phrases, smaller breaths. Long phrases, deeper, more expansive breaths so you have enough air to carry you through the entire phrase. Something else to consider beyond the length of the phrase is the punctuation in the phrase. Now, if you're in a choir or group ensemble, you can depend on the choir master or leader to tell you where to breathe. But if you're singing independently and doing a solo, then what you need is to consider the punctuation, and does that punctuation allow for smaller breaths? We're not in a breathing competition here. You don't get a gold star or a trophy for singing as long as you can on one breath. Sometimes the phrase calls for that. Sometimes if there's commas, if there's periods, if you see a rest in the music, that's an invitation to take a little breath, and it will help the pacing of the sentence so it's natural. You want your song sentences to have the same pacing as when you speak. If I'm speaking like this and I go through sentence after sentence and I sing it all in one breath, that is not natural. If I'm speaking a sentence, I have natural pauses. I have a little space at the end to break up the sentences. So consider the commas, the periods, the rests in the music, and breathe accordingly. So just to retouch upon that golden rule of thumb that I mentioned earlier, you want your air to always be moving. And in accordance with this, you're going to time your breaths and pace your breaths so that your airflow is always being released steadily. You never want to be holding your breath when you're singing. Think about what happens when our lungs expand with air. I have a lot of pressure in my lungs. What does that pressure want to do? It wants to be released. A big part of breathing for singing is that we expand our lungs with air and we keep our ribs buoyant and expanded so that that air can stay in our lungs as we need it. So a big part of breathing is just the management and release of the airflow. I'm taking as much air as I need and I'm planning the release. Keeping my ribs open and buoyant on the release. So if I'm over-tanking on air, what happens is I'm going to either release it too fast, because there's nowhere else for that air to go if I'm not holding my breath, or what's going to happen is it's just going to be so pressurized, it's all going to come out in a big gasp on the first note or two. This is very common, and this is why singers will feel like they take a huge breath and then 2-3 seconds in, they have no air left. It's because you overpressurized on air and the air all escaped because it wanted to release that pressure tank as quickly as possible. Only take as much air as you need for the length of the phrase. Occasionally, you will take in too much air and then you just let it all go at the end of the phrase. This is not ideal because it takes extra concentration, but you do adapt to this as you become more experienced with breathing as a singer. Practice the planning of the intake and release, and this also includes when am I going to breathe before the phrase. Often in choirs especially, it's tempting to breathe 5-6 seconds before you start. This happened to me all the time and I could never figure it out when I was like 10-year-old in a choir. You want to time the breathing so that you're not holding your breath. This might mean that you breathe a little closer to the beginning of the line, so 2 seconds before you start, or it might mean you just plan a slower intake of air. So whichever you choose to do, either closer to the words or slower intake of air, you need to practice that timing and pace how much air you need and plan that with the release of air. So it's about timing of the breath. It's about how much air you're taking. Don't overtank. Make sure that you're planning for the needs of the phrase. And then steady release. Don't let it all come out in a big rush. Steady, slow release. It's about the pacing of the inhalation. Just a quick explanation for you here on a phrase we hear all the time as singers: sing from the diaphragm. Now, I used to be very opposed to this because I know it's just not accurate. The diaphragm is an involuntary muscle. We don't directly control it. However, the more I've thought about this and experienced breathing as a performer myself, I've realized that this instruction can be beneficial because it engages the core. When we're singing, we do want to be feeling that release and expansion throughout our torso, and that involves engaging the core as we sing. So sing from the diaphragm. When you hear that, translate that in your mind to, okay, engage my core. Feel the expansion through my entire torso. Stay buoyant, stay open, don't collapse, engage my core, and then feel that slow, steady, gradual release, which is partially controlled through the core, translated from sing from the diaphragm. So you see how it's all connected, all engaged. The diaphragm is not directly controlled, but it's an involuntary reaction. One more breathing concept I wanted to touch on is the concept of the appoggio. The word appoggio is translated to lean. So the idea is that when we take a breath, we're keeping our ribs open and we have a feeling of leaning against the ribs to feel that sensation of support. I'm not keeping them stiff or locked, keeping my ribs open even as I exhale. It can be very helpful if you're prone to collapsing your ribs all the time. Don't collapse inwards. Two very common mistakes are collapsing inwards, just collapsing the ribs so that the air escapes too quickly. And the other is doing shallow breathing in the upper chest. So you can see my chest moving. It's just little gasps of air from the upper chest, which doesn't fill the lungs and expand the lungs. So when you see this upper chest breathing, it's not going to be enough to support longer phrases. You might get away with it in short phrases, but you won't get that sustained, strong tone that you're probably looking for. And you definitely won't get that air that you need without tightening in your throat and turning all red in the face. I hope this answers your questions, concerns, confusion about breathing. It's a very expansive topic. You can go as in depth and do a deep dive for as long as you want. This is just, again, a high-level overview. If you have any burning questions that you want answered, please drop them in the comments. Let's get into a few exercises just to help you feel engagement in your body as you support your singing with the breath. I'm breathing like I'm breathing through a straw, and I'm doing that because it helps me feel that expansion and it helps me control the release. Feel the air come in through the straw, gradual release. It can be very helpful to sing some consonants or to voice some consonants just to feel that lower body engagement. Let's start with this sh, sh, sh. And as you're doing this, focus on the intake of air, and then you're going to focus on pacing the output. Sh, sh, sh. It can be helpful to count and set time goals for yourself to help with the pacing. I'll just give you a few reps so you get the idea. So you could start with 10 seconds. So I'm going to breathe in, and I'm going to time my output for 10 seconds. Shh, 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 shh. And then if I have extra air, I'd release it all at the end. I would recommend dropping it down 1 second at a time, but now I'm going to go for 5 seconds. So I time my inhale, out for 5, shh, 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 and then I release all the extra air at the end. I'm going to try for 2, which can be, believe it or not, as challenging as 10. Shh, shh, and I release all my extra air at the end. And as I'm doing this, I feel my ribs expanding, I feel my core engagement, my whole system is connected and supported with the breath. Other consonants you could use instead of sh would be f, or k, or s, or ts. Next step is I would practice the pacing and inhalation, and then on the exhalation, I would voice it with notes like this. She, and then set a goal for how long you're holding that last note. So I might hold it for 5 seconds, for example. Sh, sh, she, sh, sh, she. she, she, she. I'm going to be following this up with another breathing exercises regime. So if that interests you, if you want to sing to more breathing exercises, stay tuned for that. In the meantime, please remember to subscribe for future videos and drop any questions you have in the comments. Thanks for watching.